Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in global environmental conflicts, we will be talking about conflicts over aquatic resources. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Mr. Atul Bharadwaj. Mr. Bharadwaj is adjunct fellow at Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. So today we are going to discuss conflict over aquatic resources. Basically, we are going to deal with two issues, conflict as well as water. First is, what role does water, or rather lack of it, plays in causing a conflict? And lastly, how does conflict or war impact water systems? The nature of the conflict and the human response to it have changed significantly in the past several decades. Conflict has moved predominantly from interstate to intrastate, from ones with a classical geopolitical or ideological nature, such as the Cold War, to the ones that are focused on natural resources, competition, identity and state failures, from between superpowers to within developing countries or countries in transition, from traditional state-run armies to smaller privatized security forces, what we call as guerrillas or mercenaries. From military security, we've actually moved on to a much broader concept, which is called human security. Security of fresh water is an increasingly critical public health problem today. In many parts of the world, world leaders have urged that this issue be considered on a very high priority basis. Inadequate access to safe fresh water contributes to waterborne disease, malnutrition, poverty, economic and political instability, and conflict, basically a violent conflict between countries or groups within the countries. Approximately 97.5% of all water is either salt water or water that has become polluted. Of the remaining 2.5%, nearly 70% is frozen in glaciers and polar ice caps. Less than 0.01% of all water worldwide is available for human use in lakes, rivers, reservoirs, and easily accessible aquifers. About 3/5 of the water flowing in all rivers is shared by 2 or more countries. In 263 river basins in 145 countries where 2/5 of the world's population lives. As a result, many countries are highly dependent on water resources that originate either from outside their national territory. For example, 34% of the water resources in India and 76% of the water resources in Pakistan originate from outside these countries. As another example, the Nile River Basin is shared by 11 countries that are mutually dependent for their water resources. The World Bank estimates that people generally require 100 to 200 liters of water daily to meet their basic needs. If one includes other uses of water such as agriculture, industry, and energy production, then the total annual average requirement of water per person is 1000 cubic meters. In 1990, 11 countries in arid or semi-arid regions of Africa and Middle East had less than 1000 cubic meters of fresh water available per person. Given anticipated major population increases, each of the 11 countries will have substantially less water per person in 2025. 1 billion people do not have access to safe water, a problem that will likely increase as the world population grows from 6.8 billion people now to about 9 billion by 2050. This problem likely will become especially severe in countries with high population growth rates like India and China that share a major source of fresh water with other countries. Conflicts over water both within countries and between countries are sharply increasing. However, few of these conflicts have led to violence. The major underlying reasons for these conflicts are low rainfall, inadequate water supply, dependency on one major water source. The second reason for the conflict is high population growth, as has already been explained, and rapid urbanization. The third is modernization and industrialization. And the fourth is a history of armed combat and poor relations between countries and among groups within the countries. Water scarcity alone, however, is infrequently the cause of armed conflict over water. Immediately precipitating causes include socio-political tensions, dispute over dams, reservoirs, and other large-scale projects. Water as a resource is comparable to oil. It is essential to all daily human activities. Water has become a very valuable commodity. Yet, freshwater resources are unevenly distributed among developing countries. This scarcity, this paucity of water has triggered desperation in countries that already have little access to water, let alone reliable water supplies. This desperation usually cannot be resolved by negotiations. If governments or rebels want water badly enough, they resort to force to obtain it. Water has very rarely been the main ingredient in international conflicts, but it is often factored into the problem due to its economic importance. According to OECD, International Energy Association, global energy needs are set to increase by 33% by 2035, with China requiring 65% more water in order to meet the demands of its industrial and energy sectors. All told, 15% of the world's total fresh water withdrawal is used for energy production. Given the increasing energy needs of developing countries, the impact this growing demand will have on already strained water resources is likely to be significant. Water systems usually arise in one country and pass through others before reaching the sea or oceans. The rivers and lakes that come of these larger water systems are typically shared by more than one country. The states where these systems originated tend to try and gain the most control over the water. Many regions around the world deal with shortages of water. However, some areas deal more with conflicts over inadequate water supplies and disputes over shared water supplies. In regions where countries compete for access to water, the relations between the countries are likely to be unstable. In regions where water supply is scarce, combat sometimes seems to be the only way to resolve the problem. It is estimated that there are 1,250 square kilometers of fresh water remaining in the world's semi-arid and arid regions, and this supply is not evenly distributed among two or more countries sharing the same water source. Severe water scarcity is the strongest in the Middle East and Northern Africa. The need for water in these regions is essential for food production used in irrigation farming. Now, discussing the complexities of this issue will help us to see different perspectives about this topic itself, including how different stakeholders make their claims for water. There are two ways of looking at this problem. One school of thought says that this strain on sustainable water resources will lead to water wars. The other school of thought sees the growing water problem in terms of water scarcity. Rather than finding new hotspots where the war may break out, the water security school focuses on ways to build resilience and adaptation. The security school is of the opinion that what is more significant than the conflict is the ecological degradation and adverse impact of this degradation on human health and well-being than the very idea of water paucity and pollution and what that may lead to. So, therefore, what we are basically focusing on is today is water wars school and the arguments that they bring to the table to analyze the consequences of water shortages across the world. Conflicts over water rights and water quality happen around the globe, from international conflicts in the Middle East and on the US-Mexico borders to local conflicts about rivers and streams in local communities. People fight over water just like they fight over the other precious resources such as gold, diamond and oil. Water is more precious than many other things, many other resources, because it is vital to life. The argument is that for centuries, war and conflict has been tied to the protection of water resources. With the risk of water shortages around the world becoming more and more of an issue, water has become the fuel of certain conflicts in many regions around the world. Water wars, they say, are becoming inevitable in the world's future as a misuse of water resources continues among countries that share the same source. International law has proven itself inadequate in defining the equal use of shared water supplies in some parts of the world. The rapid population increase has greatly affected the amount of water which is readily available to many people. Our sources of fresh water are not contained in the political boundaries that we have created. They naturally flow as landscape dictates. Some regions of the world have water to waste, whereas the others depend on every last drop of it. Water is hard to distribute. From plenty to scarcity. However, in both regions of water wealth, conflict may arise when two or more nations vie for water bodies' limited supply. as countries progress technologically, the amount of water that is desired and used by its population increases manifold. At some point, these countries will reach the limit of their resources, and it is possible that the limits of their industrial development will also be reached. The factors then which determine the speed at which these boundaries are reached include the absolute availability of water, the level of development desired, and the population that is supplied this water. In addition, the quality of water available is another factor that needs to be addressed urgently, especially when considering the pace at which urbanization is happening. Water is worthless if its quality makes it unusable. Water must be available in sufficient quantities and in good quality. Once a water resource conflict arises, it may be based on actual water body, that is, the amount of water that is present or the effects from water development projects such as dams and reservoirs. When the concern is about the amount of water present, there are several factors that may lead to water resource rivalry. These includes the degree of scarcity of water, the extent of water supply that is shared among the countries, the relative power of each states, and the accessibility of alternate fresh water supplies. Of course, other socio-political factors such as economic competition, ideological differences, and border arguments increase or perpetuate the resource-based conflict. Conflicts may also arise from the construction of a dam or a reservoir. Major development projects greatly alter the hydrological and ecological attributes of a water body system, which may displace large populations and change the way local resources are accessible. Here, let us take the example of India-China. I would not call it a dispute, but India-China disagreements over the water resources arrangement. Discourses over waters of Brahmaputra river have been doing the rounds ever since China's announcement about the construction of 3 dams on the river a few years ago. China is keen to divert the waters from Brahmaputra. In the past, China did not have a strong reason to divert this flow of river, but now they do have because of growing urbanization in China. At present, China's per capita water reserve is approximately 2,300 cubic meters, 1/4 of the world's average. China is therefore considered as the 13th most water poor country in the world, with 80% of its cities severely water stressed. More so, China's northern region possesses only 14.5% of the entire country's water resources. As water supplies tighten, the water quality is degrading. Ecology is suffering and lands are becoming barren. This threatens the country's economic growth. Thus, the ever increasing gap in the demand and supply chain in China's northern region has now pushed the country to move forward with its many dam projects. China is keen to divert 150 billion cubic meters of water and push the waters to irrigate northern China. Of this, 50 billion cubic meters would be diverted from Brahmaputra. And this is exactly what the Indian government is fearing. Previous government had tried to sign an agreement with China, and there was some understanding according to which they were to share with each other the water resources. However, the negotiations are still in progress. Finally, one important question is, will a water resource conflict lead to a violent conflict? Multiple sources maintain violence will most likely not be a factor in water disputes, because most of the countries would like to get into a negotiations with the adversary. The upper riparian state in this particular case, which has a greater control over the water resources which flows to a lower riparian state, would not like to go into a war, because in any case it is in a position of strength. The lower riparian state, which needs water, would not like to go to war or a violent conflict over the issue of water, because they in any case are in need of water. They need to negotiate, they need to come to an agreement with the country with which they are having trouble. There has been much speculation over what causes conflicts of water. The conflicts arise over who has the power to control water, as I explained earlier, and therefore control the economy and the population. By breaking it down into categories, we can begin to understand the causes. Conflict can be caused by water use, which includes military, industrial, agricultural, domestic and political uses. Through the military and political uses, conflicts can be exacerbated by the use of water systems as a weapon and as to achieve political goals. In relation to industrial and agricultural uses, conflicts may arise from the overuse and degradation of water resources and the insufficient amount that is left over for communities. Conflicts can further be a result of pollution affecting the quality of water itself. The military is already most likely the number one producer of waste in the world, and the leftover chemicals and weapons used in times of war or even limited wars or small conflicts can have adverse impact on the water supplies. Conflict can affect water systems through impacts on water resources directly, as well as on the planning, construction, operations and management of water systems. We use the term water system broadly to encompass all necessary components that relate to access and delivery of water from its sources to the point of use to disposal. This definition includes a range of water access and distribution systems, from a private well supplying a single use to a large complex municipal system serving a plethora of uses. This definition of water system also includes the governance institutions and those involved in directly managing water resources, which can range from simple community-based organizations to large utilities and government agencies. Impacts to water system are organized into 4 categories: natural resources, physical infrastructure, human capital, socio-political and financial systems. Waste from industries and agriculture can contaminate groundwater resources if not disposed of properly, and cause frustration for those who must travel to obtain sufficient daily water supplies. This lack of water quality can cause a conflict to arise regarding the distribution of water. Not having water evenly distributed among people and countries creates an imbalance among those who share water supplies. And this is particularly true in developing part of the world. To conclude, I would say that water is the lifeblood of human societies. It sustains and nurtures our ability to lead full lives. When water supplies are diverted, polluted, blocked or overdrawn, it directly impacts the possibilities of human life. That is the real story of water insecurity. There are complex and real links between water and conflict. While water resources have rarely been the source of violent conflict or war, there is a long history of tensions and violence over access to water resources or water systems and the use of water systems as weapons during the war. My final point is that the increase of urbanization has increased and the demand for water has also increased concomitantly. However, the supply cannot take care of the demand. With the problem of uneven water distribution, future conflicts can occur. As societies become more developed, they tend to use more resources, like water. Take the most recent case of water tensions between the state of Delhi and Haryana, when the Indian Army took control of the Muna Canal that supplies 3/5 of Delhi's fresh water. This happened when demonstrators in Haryana switched off the water supply to the capital's 18 million residents. The state of Delhi draws 900 million gallons of fresh water each day from across northern India, of which 60% of which must flow through Haryana, and this is the reality that we've discussed throughout our paper. In this session, we will be discussing shipping and its impact on marine life. Only in the last decade has there been recognition that marine ecosystems worldwide are suffering a massive decline in biodiversity and irreparable alterations to ecosystem functions. The capacity of the oceans to maintain ecosystem, goods and services is rapidly weakening. Climate change, pollution, overfishing and habitat degradation have been identified as the main causes of marine biodiversity loss and thus priorities for conservation interventions. According to experts, report various maritime associated impacts on marine biodiversity, and these impacts are likely to grow at an alarming rate. These impacts are due to ships pollution and emissions, collisions and noise, grounding and anchor damage, and transportation of non-indigenous species. Substandard ships and poor shipping practices are leading to massive marine pollution and damage. Some 20% of sea pollution comes from deliberate dumping of oil and other waste from ships, from accidental spills and offshore oil drillings. But of all the sources of marine pollution, the discharge of oily engine waste and bilges from day-to-day shipping operations may be the worst, because it is steadily occurs everywhere. Even low levels of contamination can kill the larvae and cause diseases. Oil slicks kills birds, marine mammals and fishes, particularly near coast, and coagulated oil destroys coastal habitats. The threats posed by shipping are not spread evenly across the oceans, but rather concentrated in busy shipping lanes and ports. As shipping lanes become more congested, the level of pollution caused by shipping increases drastically, as does the chances of spills and accidents. Increased shipping traffic also threatens natural habitat around ports and near shipping routes. Seagrass, meadows, wetlands and mudflats, which are increasingly recognized as fundamental elements of a country's natural environment and economic resource base, which are often located near or in maritime port locations. The release of oil and chemicals through accident spills and operational discharges transfers invasive alien species through the blast water and on ship's hull. The release of biocides from toxic chemicals used as anti-fouling paints is also responsible for releasing invasive alien species. Most commonly associated with ships pollution are oil spills, while less frequent than pollution that occurs from daily operations. Oil spills have devastating impact. While being toxic to marine life, it is the toxic component in the crude oil which is very difficult to clean up, and it lasts for years in the sediments and marine environment. Marine species constantly exposed to such toxic material can exhibit developmental problems, susceptibility to disease and abnormal reproductive cycles. One of the most widely known spills was the Exxon incident in Alaska. The ship ran aground and dumped a massive amount of oil into the ocean. This happened in March 1989. Despite effort by scientists and large number of volunteers, over 4 lakh seabirds and about 1,000 sea otters and large number of fish got killed in the process. Now we come to another issue, which is the greenhouse gas emissions, which the ships are accused rather of emitting into the marine environment. The ships generate emission of sulfur oxides, oxides of nitrogen, particulate matter and carbon dioxide as a result of the fuel used to power them. Ship generated emissions can be significant in areas subject to heavy marine traffic. Oxides of nitrogen, sulfur oxides and particulate matter are all byproducts of combustions associated with engines used on ships and other transportation modes. The oxide of nitrogen emissions from diesel engines are a function of the engine design and are generally controlled through standards established for new engines, and this process is done by the International Marine Organization, the IMO. The sulfur oxides and the particulate matter emissions are heavily influenced by the fuel used and its relative sulfur content. Standards of these and other air emissions are established by the International Marine Organization, IMO, as I explained it, as well as by national and regional authorities dealing with maritime affairs. Air pollution from cruise ships is generated by diesel engines that burn high sulfur content fuel oil, also known as bunker oil, producing sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide and particulate matter. In addition to carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide and hydrocarbons. Diesel exhaust has been classified as a likely human carcinogen. These emissions from marine diesel engines contribute to ozone and carbon monoxide non-attainment, as well as adverse health effects associated with ambient concentration of particulate matter and visibility, haze, acid, deposition and nitrification of water. Of the total global air emissions, shipping accounts for 18 to 30% of nitrogen oxide and 9% of sulfur oxides. Sulfur in air creates acid rain which damages crop and buildings. When inhaled, sulfur is known to cause respiratory problems also. It also is known to increase the heart diseases. According to experts, the fuel used in oil tanker and container ships is high in sulfur and cheaper to buy compared to the fuel used for domestic land use. A ship lets out around 50 times more sulfur than a lorry per metric ton of cargo carried. Now we come to the carbon emissions. Marine traffic accounts for approximately 2.1% of the world's CO2 emissions, and liner shipping accounts for approximately 1/4 of the total 2.1% associated with all marine traffic, while moving roughly 52% of the maritime commerce by value. Like other air emissions discussed above, the CO2 is produced as ships use petroleum-based fuels to power both main and auxiliary engines. Numerous efforts are on to reduce CO2. improve efficiency, and secure a global agreement addressing CO2 emissions from ships through International Maritime Organization. Now we come to another reason of how ships increase the levels of pollution in marine life, and this includes the discharges from the vessels. Large commercial merchant liner or large commercial vessels routinely discharge blast water, grey and black water, bilge water, and other discharges incidental to normal vessel operations and consistent with the international and national standards. Blast water discharges are a concern due to their potential to transfer aquatic invasive species into the marine environment from one location to another, with consequent changes in regional and local systems. Cruise ships, large tankers, and bulk cargo carriers use a huge amount of ballast water, which is often taken on in the coastal waters in one region after the ship discharges wastewater or unloads its cargo, and they discharge it at the next port of call. Wherever more cargo is loaded, blast water discharge typically contains a variety of biological materials, including plants, animals, viruses, and bacteria. These materials often include non-native, nuisance, invasive, exotic species that can cause extensive ecological and economic damage to aquatic ecosystems, along with serious human health problems. Discharges of sewage, also known as black water and grey water, which is the effluent generated from wash basins and showers on board ships. The cruise line industry dumps about 2,55,000 gallons of grey water and 30,000 US gallons of black water into the sea every day. Black water is sewage, wastewater from toilets and medical facilities, which can contain harmful bacteria, pathogens, viruses, intestinal parasites, and harmful nutrients. Discharges of untreated and inadequately treated sewage can cause bacteria and viral contamination of fisheries and shellfish beds, producing risk to public health. Nutrients in sewage such as nitrogen and phosphorus promote excessive algae blooms, which consume oxygen in water and can lead to fish kills and destruction of other aquatic life. A large cruise ship, 3,000, which carries about 3,000 passengers and crew, generates an estimated of 55,000 to 1,10,000 liters per day of black water waste, which all goes into the oceans. Coming back to the invasive species, which are transferred from one geographic location to another through the blast water discharges, are also done by hull fouling or through the movement of products and their packaging. So, these are the three factors which release invasive species into the marine environment. The World Shipping Council and its members are currently involved in a variety of efforts to prevent the transfer and introduction of non-indigenous species through these different routes. Aquatic invasive species also includes plants like phytoplankton, aquatic animal species, and aquatic pathogens that are not native and that may flourish in a new marine environment when introduced by various vectors, one of which is shipping and which is the main cause. The presence of aquatic invasive species may cause ecosystems and infrastructure damage, economic losses, and may pose risks to human health. Shipping related pathways for transport of aquatic invasive species includes, as we have already explained, water blast and hull fouling. I will now explain a bit of hull fouling. Hull fouling is a potential vector for transferring aquatic species. The potential for vessel to transfer aquatic species is a function of how effective the anti-fouling system is that is used by a particular vessel and whether organisms can be transported when niche fouling. In sea chests and other structures where the anti-fouling system is unable to perform in the same manner as coatings subjected to more typical water flow conditions. Since it is extremely costly for large commercial vessels to allow significant fouling of their hulls, it stands to reason that the risk of transfer is more likely associated with niche fouling or through smaller vessels that may not use effective anti-fouling systems. Asian gypsy moths are highly destructive environmental pests whose eggs can be easily transported aboard ships and on international shipping containers. This is one example of invasive species. Marine mammals and accidents are another consequence of heavy load of shipping on oceans. Marine mammals and includes approximately 78 species of whales, dolphins and other species. Some species occupy areas of ocean and exhibit behavior such as spending considerable time at the surface that makes them especially vulnerable to injury by ship traffic. For example, if a ship is traveling at a speed of only 15 knots, there is a 79% chance of a collision being lethal to a whale. One notable example of the impact of ships collision is the endangered North Atlantic whale, of which 400 or less only remain now. The greatest danger to this North Atlantic right whale is the injury sustained from ship strikes. Between 1970 and 1999, 35.5% of the recorded deaths were attributed to collision with the ships. During 1999 to 2003, incidents of mortality and serious injury attributed to ship strikes averaged 1 per year. In 2004 to 2006, that number increased to 2.6. Many marine mammals were intensively hunted over the past 2 centuries. Commercial hunting combined with other stresses has led to severely reduced populations of many species of whales and other marine animals. The other factor which we are considering now is the noise generated by shipping. As the world's ocean have become subjected to higher levels of exploration and use, including a large number of ship traffic, concerns has grown about the effect of these activities on ambient level of noise in the marine environment. More specifically, the researchers are concerned about the effects of elevated noise levels have on the marine mammals, communications, breeding and general behavior patterns. The noise produced by ships can travel long distances, and marine species who may rely on sound for their orientation, communication and feeding can be harmed by these sound pollution. Coral reefs harbor a tremendous diversity of marine species. They serve to protect otherwise fragile coastal areas and support economic activities that are critical to numerous economies around the world. Coral reefs are also undergoing severe decline as a result of sedimentation, excess nutrient loads, warming temperatures and other stresses caused due to heavy shipping. Over the last 2 centuries, wood, hemp and other organic material traditionally used in maritime sector have been replaced with steel and other synthetic materials which are used in shipbuilding. This change in material has occurred not only in the construction of ships themselves, but has also occurred across the full spectrum of products used on board as well as the products which are transported. This change in material has introduced a new set of challenges and environmental problems, since many of these materials are not readily biodegradable. New management systems have been required to deal with the challenges associated with these materials and the increased level of use resulting from growing world population. International standards have been established for the management of marine debris and the recycling of ships' containers and the dismantling and the recycling of ships themselves. And here the scrapping of the ship itself causes lot of environmental damage. Marine debris is a serious and growing problem as it constitutes a very serious threat for many marine species as a result of ingestion and entanglement. Marine debris is generated by a variety of sources, most of which are land based, but due to rainfall and drainage patterns, it finds its way to the marine environment. Other sources includes discarded fishing gear and ship generated debris. To conclude, I would say that the international maritime organizations and other organizations are involved in removing a lot of adverse effects caused by shipping, which carries 90% of the global trade. The scope of issue is quite broad, including regulations to improve air quality, climate, preventing the spread of invasive species, the reduction of marine noise and variety of other issues relating to protection of human health and environment through the oceans.
Sir, I just wanted to ask you a question, a quick one if I can have. Brahmachelani has made an argument that future wars will be fought over water. And if I gather what is being discussed in your lecture is that the disputes between upper riparian and lower riparian states over water will be negotiated rather than fought. So how will you reply to say a Chelani kind of an argument?
No, between the upper riparian and the lower riparian, there are bound to be disputes. As I tried to explain in my lecture, there are certain problems arising because China needs more water now, because the pace at which it has developed, the kind of urbanization which is happening in China has resulted in greater demand in China. The supply, and for diverting those waters to the areas where it is scarce in China, they are building large dams. Now our concern is that the Brahmaputra's origin is in Tibet basically. The flow of Brahmaputra should not get impacted for us, because that is our concern. But will it lead to wars is a question. It may lead to greater diplomacy. It may lead to greater negotiations, because going to war like India and Pakistan, which are two big adversaries, have actually do not go to war over water. They go to war over many other reasons. They may go to war over many other reasons, but water is something which they have negotiated over. Similarly, we have tried to settle our, when it comes to the issue of upper riparian, in context of Bangladesh, we are an upper riparian state and Bangladesh is a lower riparian state. Yes. But yet we have negotiated with them. We are in the process of, solving the entire water sharing issue. and with greater transparency between nations with co-terminus borders from where the water flows into each other, I think things can be sorted out rather than resorting to war over that particular issue.
But the question remains that water is more crucial than, say, other political reasons for states to fight over. Won't you agree with that? It's more important for states to, say, fight over water because it's more fundamental to them, it's more basic to them.
You know, you can fight over water, you can fight over anything for that matter, but the issue is that when you are getting into a fight, you know, how decisive is that going to be?
Okay.
Is that going to solve your water problem, or is it going to aggravate your water problem? That is the main issue. So decision to go to war on any issue depends upon, you know, unless and until you have the wherewithal to control water. If we are talking in terms of, say, if Bangladesh has the wherewithal to control the water supplies which are coming from India, then it makes sense for them to launch a war in India. But if they cannot achieve that purpose, then they are wasting their resources. The best possible solution for them is to negotiate with India and to arrive at a water sharing agreement which is beneficial and mutually beneficial to both.
Okay, so you will say that it's better to negotiate than fight over water.
You know, it doesn't make sense.
Okay. On that note, I would like to thank sir for this very enriching discussion, and I would like to thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. I hope you have been enlightened over what a dispute over water or various pollutions to water that can happen or that is happening around us. On that note, thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.